Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of A Week in Watches. I am your host, Zach Weiss, co-founder of Worn & Wound. Thank you for joining me. This week we have a few new and interesting releases from brands such as Ming and IWC and some others. I'm also going to try out a new little segment called My Two Cents, where, as the name might suggest, I'm going to give you an opinion on something I've been thinking about. It's going to be short, going to be quick. Hopefully we'll start a conversation. If you have any questions regarding watch news or industry-related topics, please do leave them in the comments on the post or wherever you found this video or podcast. And also feel free to email them to info@wornandwound.com. Before we get into it, please don't forget to like and subscribe to this video if you found it informative. This week's sponsor is the Wind Up Watch Shop once again, where we recently added Paulin watches from Scotland. And that includes actually a Wind Up Watch Shop exclusive colorway of the popular Neo watch in a kind of a verdant dark green color. So please check that out and more at windupwatchshop.com. Ming celebrates their birthday with a new watch. So Ming is a Malaysian-based brand founded by Ming Tan and a team of other like-minded individuals. We actually had Ming on the podcast, the Worn & Wound podcast, back in 2019. So if you'd like to hear his thoughts on the brand, please go check that out. It's a very unique take on watches, very modern and contemporary style. It is not vintage inspired at all. They have some signature design aspects to them, the most significant being a kind of sort of a flared lug design. It's the kind of thing you can recognize on someone's wrist from across the room. They've always sort of focused on modern techniques and materials, use a lot of sapphire, they use floating indices, really interesting things. And when they first launched, they did something quite unique, which was they launched essentially at two price points. So they had a sub $1,000 watch, and then they had a 5-figure watch. I think it was around $15,000 or something, and they go up from there. They work on those higher end watches with a Swiss manufacturer and movement company named Schwarz Etienne, which is also a brand unto themselves that makes very high-end movements and has quite a high level of manufacturing capability. And in doing so, they've mixed the attitudes of sort of micro brands and haute independence, which is still a fairly unique approach to a brand, even several years later, well, 5 years later, as the case may be. So for their 5th anniversary, they've launched a watch called the 37.07, and this features a very unique mosaic dial. So this isn't the first time they've had a mosaic dial. Previously, they had a watch called the 20.11, which used layers of laser-etched sapphire to create a unique mosaic, sort of ghosty mosaic on the dial. That one also featured a micro rotor movement by the Schwarz Etienne brand and was around $15K. It was very popular, but it was a very small production. So for the 37.07, they use a different technique, one that is more mass manufacturable, and I believe less expensive in order to bring the price point down, and utilizes as well a lume plate. So in the darkness, this is also like a backlit mosaic. It's extremely attractive. It's very unique looking. The whole dial is almost just like a piece of art. It also features one of their signature floating lume indexes, which is sort of an infilled lume within a crystal. And the case on that is a 38 millimeter case that is 44.5 millimeters lug to lug, 10.5 millimeters thick. Features their flared lug design as well. And from their previous designs, I would say you can definitely see the evolution in the case as it sort of changed a little bit. The dial aperture feels a little bit more open. The bezel feels like a little bit more refined in its approach. Inside is the Sellita SW210.M1, which is a manual wound version of the Sellita SW200, which is a fairly common movement at this point, but they have dramatically redecorated it. And I believe that is with the help of the Schwarz Etienne brand. So this isn't just Côte de Genève and perlage in unique ways. The movement has been coated black on various plates. Parts of it have been skeletonized. It has been just really radically redesigned so that it looks more like an in-house bespoke movement. And it certainly is a very unique treatment. The launch of this watch happened on the 29th. So unfortunately, that is before the airing of this broadcast. there was very little time between the announcement of this watch and the actual launch, and so unfortunately we could not get an episode out in that brief window. But it was launched in two essentially ordering windows where anyone who ordered would be able to receive their watch, and it was priced at 3,250 Swiss francs, which was around $3,400. Those who did purchase this watch are now going to have to wait until May 2023 to receive their new watch. Christopher Ward goes small, yet big. Last time Christopher Ward was on the show, we were announcing that they become the timing partner of the Everton Football Club, which was, exciting news for the brand. It was all well and good. But today we have a new watch release, which, let's be frank, is a little bit more exciting. And I'm just going to cut to the chase. It's a 36mm C63 Sealander. So the C63 Sealander line was a return of the brand to a slightly more value-minded line of watches. When Christopher Ward first came out, they were really focused on affordable automatics, Swiss-made affordable automatics that were in the $400 range, something really crazy. Over the years, their watches have crept up in price, though they're still extremely value-driven. Now with the average, I'd say, being between like $1,000 and $1,300. So to give people something that was, a little bit more to the roots of the brand, they created the C63 line, which were sort of simpler watches, slightly simpler dials rather, like lower water resistance, and they started in the around $700 range. They still feature the light catcher case design, which has become a signature of the brand over the last few years, which is a really gorgeous case featuring really fantastic finishing, particularly at the price point, beautiful brushing, polishing, some interesting undercuts. It's a very dynamic case design, so there's no loss in quality there, and they still feature Swiss-made movements, most commonly from Sellita inside. So the value really is there. So what's new for this watch is that it's a 36mm case. They've had 36mm cases in the past, but not in a while. And as of the last few years, 38mm was really the minimum case size you could get from the brand. So in addition to that diameter, the lug-to-lug is 42.87mm, and the height is 10.75mm, and those are direct from Christopher Ward's website. So I actually got a brief chance to see this in Chicago. They had a prototype behind the booth, and I got a peek of it, and I got to put it on my wrist, and I have to say that it really wore very well. It was actually felt a little bit larger than 36mm, and that could have been from the lugs. Or perhaps at this point 36mm just doesn't feel that small. At launch there are going to be 6 versions of the 36mm Sealander. They all have the same dial layout, which is a flat dial featuring applied blocky lume-filled markers and a date window kind of perfectly positioned at 6. Because of the size of this watch, the date on the Sellita SW200 movements just like hits right exactly where it should, which is a really nice detail. They also feature the newer twin flag logo. For those people who've been paying attention to the Christopher Ward branding saga of the last decade or so, this features just the newest, which is just the twin flag logo. And the watches are starting at $765, so very competitively priced. There are 4 limited dial colors at launch that have this sort of rich jewel tone colors that perhaps have been sort of on trend as of late. There's Lucerne Blue, which is a kind of a bright teal light blue kind of a color. It might seem a little familiar. There's a Jura Green, which is a dark verdant green. Acer Red, once again a dark kind of rich red. And then New Forest Yellow, which is a bright sort of burnt orange yellow. So they're all very attractive. They come with matching straps if you want to go really loud, as well as, I believe, an alternate as well. So yes, like I said, these sort of look like some similar watches that might have come out by some larger Swiss luxury watch brands, but cost a lot of money, are hard to get if they're even available at all. So these at $765 are a really fantastic alternative. That said, there's only 200 of each of those, so they're likely to go quick, and it's even possible by the time of airing they will already be gone. Luckily, there's also a version in black and a version in white, so those are just going to be standards to the collection. So if you're looking for just a classic pure version in 36mm, they've got you covered. If only they were titanium. For the first version of My 2 Cents, I'm going to talk about why titanium is better than steel. I mean, what else is there really to say? Titanium is better than steel. It's quickly becoming my preferred watch material, particularly for an everyday watch. It's super light. anywhere from 30 to 45% lighter than steel. Some Googling will give you a whole range. Some brands claim more, some brands claim less. But regardless, a titanium watch is noticeably different on the wrist compared to a steel watch of a similar build. When you hold a steel watch, the heft might be impressive. It might add to the feeling of solidity and sturdiness, a sense of quality that is reassuring, certainly. But lightness is comfort. And I dare say comfort is an aspect of good design. It's also an aspect of luxury and refinement. On a bracelet in particular, the comfort difference is night and day. Just as a quick weight comparison, size for my wrist, the Grand Seiko SBGA 413, that's the Sakura spring drive, weighs about 90 grams. The Tudor Black Bay Pro, also size for my wrist, weighs around 160 grams. So that is a significant difference in weight. But it's not just weight that adds to the comfort. Titanium also has low thermal conductivity, which means when you pick it up, it's not cold, it's not hot, it's neutral. And as you wear it, it sort of adjusts to your temperature. It's always sort of the temperature you want it to be. That might sound strange, but when you wear a titanium watch for a long time, you kind of notice that you don't notice it. Additionally, titanium is more corrosion resistant, non-magnetic, and hypoallergenic, which is why you'll often see case backs of bronze watches made with titanium, but also surgical implants. And lastly, it looks great. It can be darker and more toolish than steel, particularly when bead blasted or matte finished, or it can be equally as bright and polished to a beautiful degree, making it great for sport watches, casual watches, even the occasional dress watch. Once again, in Chicago, I saw a gentleman wearing the Ophion X Orophile Spectre version of their Velos watch, which it was absolutely gorgeous. Took my breath away. Only 50 of these were made, and it was a kind of a classically designed watch featuring a case manufactured by Kari Voutilanen. It's case manufactured with big, like pearly, teardrop lugs, but it was all matte gray titanium, and it was just absolutely striking. Yes, titanium can be a little easy to scratch, but let's be honest, steel is not that difficult too. We all have swirlies on our watches anyway. But there are hardened versions or coated versions of titanium out there as well from brands like Grand Seiko, Citizen, and perhaps others. Are there any titanium titans out there? Stainless steel soldiers, golden gods? Let me know what your preferred case material is and why. And now it's time for the release of the week. IWC quietly drops the Mark 20. IWC is a brand that also does not need much intro. They are an iconic Swiss luxury brand, a household name. They have boutiques in every major city in the world, I think. They're founded in 1868 by an American, believe it or not, from Boston. And they are now known primarily for their Pilot's lines. They're known for their chronographs, particularly within that line, their ceramic cases, as well as other exotic case materials such as ceratanium. But of course, they also make divers with the Aqua Timer line. They have dress watches in the Portuguese or in Portofino line. And then they have various high complications that they release over the years. Most notably, and perhaps most popular, is the perpetual calendar, which you will find in a big Pilot. But of all of that, the Mark line is perhaps their most important marquee name, along with the big Pilot. So the Mark line dates back actually to the Mark 10, but is usually given a nod to the Mark 11, which was the first real Pilot's version of this because it had a soft iron inner cage in there to protect it from magnetism. And this was a watch that was created for the British Royal Air Force. And it was it was and really still is a truly iconic military watch, as well as just a really gorgeous watch. It was 36 millimeters, featured large Arabic numerals, save at 12, where it had a triangle. At 12, 3, 6, and 9, it featured wider markers, which gave it a sort of crosshair sort of look to it, which distinguishes it from some other Pilot watches that you've seen. And of course, my personal favorite aspect of it is this really fantastic handset. So rather than the traditional Pilot handset, it had a blunted rectangular hour hand and then a long, thin fence post minute hand, which just matched the dial really well and once again just gave it a sort of distinctive look. Over the years, new models were released, And at around Mark 16, things began to really change. It became more modernized. They began to play with the layout a little bit, change the dial up, change the finishing. It started to lose its sort of military and tool heritage and become more of what the brand was becoming, which was a luxury watch. Also on the Mark 16, they replaced the gorgeous handset with Roman swords, which gave it a more kind of classic Flieger style to it. Occasionally there were movement changes, little size variations, etc. Each iteration has its pros and cons, its fans and haters. The Mark 17 famously had the altimeter date window, which I'm not sure if anyone was too fond of. Just kidding. And that was, though, gone by Mark 18, which was the most recent version until this week. IWC quietly in the night, or maybe during the day, nobody really knows, added the Mark 20 to their website. No press release, no parties, no fanfare, an anti-release of sorts. But naturally that caused a stir all on its own, and it popped up literally everywhere. The question remains, though, what happened to the Mark 19? No one knows. Is it a disaster unfit for human eyes? A secret project for Black Ops? Perhaps someone was just bad at counting. This is clearly the greatest mystery in the history of watchmaking. But anyway, the Mark 20 is another iterative release. There's minor aesthetic updates. The markers at 12, 3, 6, and 9 have been elongated, nodding back to the Mark 11. This also slightly helps the date window, which starting on Mark 18 felt a little bit too close to the center. So now the negative space to the right of that window has been eaten up a little bit. That said, it's still a little bit too close to center, if you ask me. The hands now have also been given a rhodium plating for even a more luxurious finish, but alas, are still not those iconic Mark 11 hands. The biggest change, however, is within. IWC changed the caliber from the 35111, which was a Sellita-based movement, to the 32111, which is an IWC Richemont Valfleurier made movement. Perhaps you could call it in-house or in-group versus an outsourced movement, which is obviously, good for a brand of IWC's stature. But it's not just the name and who makes it that is the difference. This movement features a 120-hour power reserve, which is 5 days. That's a massive increase over the previous watch's 40 hours. We've definitely noticed 72 plus hours kind of becoming the standard, particularly on new movements and luxury movements in the last few years. Ironically, though, a long power reserve is most noticed when the watch is off your wrist. Certainly, though, having an in-house movement increases the value consideration of the watch. On leather, the Mark 20 starts at $5,250, whereas the Mark 18 was $4,500. So that is a fairly significant increase in price, obviously, but I would say that having an in-house movement with a 5-day power reserve at $5,250 is a better value than the Sellita-based watch at $4,500. So what do you think? Is the Mark 20 an improvement over the Mark 18? But more importantly, what happened to the Mark 19? Crazy theories only. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of A Week in Watches. Thanks again for tuning in. Please don't forget to head to Worn and Wound Daily for all sorts of news and reviews about watches and the watch industry, and we'll see you next week.